Right now, retired Lieutenant General Richard Newton. He's a friend of the show. He's joined us many times to discuss this situation. Thank you again for making the time to speak with us today. Can we talk about this deadly strike on this military base and what it exactly means for Russia in terms of their strategy now?
Well, good morning, Adrienne, and welcome back. This strike indicated yesterday that Putin is willing to, again, extend his forces and is trying to demonstrate his capabilities to do so. He did it from using aircraft. It was, again, to me, not in terms of a significant destruction, but it was certainly significant in terms of again, showing that he's going beyond just the eastern flank of Ukraine and now extending to the west. And it's also based on frankly, a warning that the deputy foreign minister of Russia on Saturday said that any efforts by the United States and NATO to resupply Ukraine, we consider those legitimate targets. And that's why he went after this major staging base for resupply there in the western part of Ukraine, which is only, 12 miles from Poland, but also of significance, it was only within about 65 miles of where our 82nd Airborne troops have recently deployed several weeks or so ago.
And this was a facility that in the past had some drills that they would conduct with NATO forces. It houses what we're told is the International Center for Peacekeeping and Security, the largest military training facility in Western Ukraine. Does it change the U.S. strategy in any way?
Well, no, I don't think it changes our strategy, but it certainly is a wake-up call that Putin is, again, trying to extend his reach. And by the way, that training facility housed 160 members of the Florida National Guard. And back on the 12th of February, I believe, Secretary Lloyd Austin had told them to depart that area because there could be a threat of the invasion and so forth. But in terms of the overall strategy aspect of this, again, this is Putin, again, I believe he's on his heels with regard to the invasion. It's, as Nick has reported earlier at the board, he's somewhat bogged down. He's off his timeline. The Ukrainian resistance has been extraordinarily stiff. So, again, part of the Putin playbook would be to, again, first try to control the narrative, but secondly, show that he does have this reach. Not only would his targets be that military training facility there, as you allude to, but it also would be part of the corridor path of the refugees. Over 2.5 million now are fleeing to the western part of Ukraine and into Poland and so forth. And so there's a calculus here, but again, it does not change the United States strategy in terms of trying to keep this conflict contained within Ukraine and usher in as many defensive forces and try to defer his actions outside of Ukraine. But it does change the calculus, certainly of President Zelensky, in terms of knowing that the western reaches of his country can be attacked. And that's the one that we've got to keep a close eye on.
And we also have to keep a close eye on the fact that as the U.S. has given billions of dollars, committed billions to helping Ukraine, there is a concern by the White House that further participation by the U.S. could escalate tensions with Russia. What's the dance that we have to choreograph here in order to keep the situation calm?
Well, it's a very nimble situation that we're in. On one hand, we're trying to, again, show no ambiguity in terms of the fact that we will defend NATO through Article 5, as we've discussed before, the fact that we will send additional forces to Europe and we will strive to unify NATO, both from a diplomatic standpoint, but also from a military and economic sanctions and so forth. But also, we need to be very clear in making sure Putin understands what our capabilities are. But also, I think we need to be less, frankly, and we need to be more ambiguous, if you will, in terms of what those red lines are, not necessarily try to, discuss every type of red line that we would cross or not cross, or he would cross or not cross, which would compel our action. Again, I think that all elements of national power need to be on the table. We're seeing today that National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is meeting with his Chinese counterpart in Rome. There are these fourth level efforts of talks between Ukraine and Russia and so forth. So we got to make sure all elements of power, and let me close on this point. The challenge is trying to stay up regarding, what actions we will take. We also have to be very mindful at this point, this delicate balance, as you allude to, Adrienne, is that inaction also creates again, it destabilizes the situation as well. So as we move forward after day 19, as Kyiv becomes under more of attack, we've got to show that we are also going to be bold and certainly due diligent in our efforts to defend any type of actions against NATO as this humanitarian crisis mounts.
Retired Lieutenant General Richard Newton. Thank you so much for being on our show, as always. Well, still ahead, top aides for the... Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to click on the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.